Howard, you asked me an interesting question a moment ago. That is, why is it difficult to talk to people? Because I was explaining how I took up diving in order to, find an activity that I can do with my wife for the rest of our lives. The nice thing about diving is you don't have to talk to the person. You're underwater looking at beautiful things and sharing, and there's a kind of oneness in that. But I'd like to return to that question in the following way, and maybe I'll draw upon the Phaedrus. The opening of that dialogue is very famous. Socrates says to his friend Phaedrus, "Where are you coming from and where are you going?" And that seems to me like a good opening question for anyone, even a stranger, to get a conversation going. So where are you coming from? What brought you to the college? And where are you going?
Well, on the question of why it's difficult to talk to someone, since we were talking about Henry IV, Part 1,
Yep.
right? Because Hal says at one point, now I've learned to talk to everyone in his own language. Right. And so I think the real question is, how do you get out of your own language into another's to be able to talk to him? Because, it seems to me increasingly in the work I do, both here at the college and out in the world, the fundamental skill that's necessary is listening. And you can't talk to anyone. What I saw so frequently, both with me and my colleagues and students here, it's strange being in this room. I think I've spent 40 years of my life in this room.
This is where we do our senior orals. Yeah.
Right, I know. Yeah. When I was a senior, just to shift off, I had my senior oral in the old room 24, and
In McDowell.
in McDowell, yeah, and
Famous 24.
the famous room 24, right? And it's interesting that listening is it's so easy to superimpose, turn what you hear into a corollary of yourself. And so somehow you think you're talking to another person, but you end up talking to yourself. And very frequently, I think Socrates is accused of talking to himself. Right? That by Thrasymachus, by people who were resistant.
Well, you said to me a moment ago, you think Socrates does not listen well.
No, I think he's a terrible listener.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think he's very open. I mean, Plato must have been an extraordinary listener to catch the nuances.
Where do you think that comes across best in the dialogues? Are any moments jump out at you where you say, there's a failure of Socrates to really listen to this person?
Well, I think that when Meno, exasperated, says he's a torpedo fish, or when Callicles says, you're tricking us, you're not being straight, you shift from one to the other, and so certainly here at the college, the temptation has been to do a more dramatized interpretation of the sequence through a dialogue, and that always troubled me. I think, I like Klein a great deal, but I think that the sort of dramatization sort of lets Socrates off scot-free. The work I do outside the college, of course, is very much on what's involved in a discussion. And I wrote a piece recently that I don't think I will publish. In the form that it's in, it's called Beyond Socratic Seminar, and it's subtitled "An Oxymoron: Socratic Seminar, an Oxymoron on the Loose."
Interesting.
Yeah, in other words, why Socrates becomes the image of something called a discussion or listening to another, and it's always, whereas I would think Hal is a better image. In order for him to be a king, you really need, in this world, I mean, in a post Richard II world, where you have a sort of divine justification, or imagine you do, where you have to sort of reconstruct the sense of legitimacy, that you really need to be attentive to really listening to where other people are.
Yeah. Hal has a mentor, though, in Falstaff.
Oh, you think he does?
Yes, I think so. I mean, do you need that? I mean, do you need someone to get you into that world? Someone that
I'm not sure.
You can be a friend with, and then that opens the doors to everything.
Well, maybe temporarily. I
Because
mean, when Falstaff comes in, I'm sorry to shift this off from the features onto
Well,
because you're an
back to
actor.
that.
You know,
I have a
you
great
like Hal,
interest in
right?
Hal, and
Yeah.
more so in Falstaff.
But when Falstaff, when they first see or exchange with one another, and what is it? Falstaff asks Hal, "What time of day is it?" And Hal responds, "What do you have to do with time of day?" And then Falstaff goes into how he is, a minion of the moon, a counterfeiter, essentially, the moon being the goddess of counterfeiters, right? And then at the end, that whole Hotspur scene about counterfeiting, and you sort of wonder, is counterfeiting important
To listening?
to listening? Yeah, yeah. And I'm wondering, so I'm not sure. Maybe at some point he had to learn something from Falstaff, but what it is, I'm not sure. Perhaps it is that to be an actor,
Or to improvise.
yeah, possibly.
I mean, one thing that they teach you when you're trying to be an actor is how to listen.
Right.
Because it's easy not to, because you have a script. So you memorize your lines, and then you're on, you know what you're supposed to say, when you're supposed to say it. And I wonder if that has something to do with the problem you're talking about.
I think it does. I mean, what the difference is between hearing.
People lead scripted lives.
That's right.
To really listen to someone who can surprise you at any time with something unexpected. Maybe that's
Well, I think that's the
listening
problem.
is.
Yeah, I think that's the problem that you find brought a lot of people to the college. I think that dissatisfaction with the kind of education that they had.
Scripted.
Well, they're passive and they're there as listener, and there's always someone who's the authority of and sort of the judge of legitimacy, and so do you have a voice? And so the question of voice, I think, and that's the question. I think that's always the case in Socrates: is he speaking for another?
You mean for Plato? Or
No, for Socrates. Is he putting words into another
I
person's
see.
mouth?
Well, it seems to me that to get back to Hal for a moment, that Hal has this ability to make people forget that he's, the next king.
Yeah.
That he's just one of them. He can play that part very well.
Right, and it's a part that he learns. I mean, except when again he has to speak, it's the problem. You have three sort of views of language with Glendower, Hotspur, and Hal. And they're very, very different. And Hotspur, in some sense, is almost he is the son of Henry IV. I mean, he's a complete nominalist who feels he can bring the world into existence through language. He can change the course of the river. There's nothing natural, right? And Glendower, of course, is so embedded with the spirits that he's a kind of Richard II, but writ large, for the whole world. And Hal's got to sort of work in between those two. And I guess...
Yeah, I wanted to ask you in a moment more about that river, but... So do you think, again, with Hal in mind or with Socrates in mind, that to listen well requires somehow giving up who you are in order to be the other?
No, I think you have to become incredibly aware of who you are, right? Because you have to block yourself from imposing yourself on another when you imagine that you're not. That's what happens so much in our classes, of course. And there's always that danger. I mean, one of the is that if the tutor is going to be the tutor, and not professorial, and open the floor to students as peers in many ways, then I think that the tutor must be very, very careful to be able to judge when people are or are not listening to one another, when they're simply listening to themselves.
Yeah. How did you learn how to do that?
To listen, I'm not. I'm a terrible listener. I'm really terrible listener. And I know some of the programs, I'm not as bad as some of the people I've met. But I'm very bad. When I'm involved with a group and in a seminar of some sense, then I have to listen. And I do. Because I have to listen to what is really so much between the lines. But the real issue of being able to listen, I think previously requires being able to genuinely question yourself and to notice those things that you are imposing one way or the other. And probably having some practice as an actor trains you for that in a way. I can see that. I mean, I think we should, there's always a question of whether we should have one of the arts. It would be interesting if everyone had to do some performance.
Well,
yeah, I think that.
I'll tell you one thing. I just saw a production of Hamlet, which was extraordinary.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why it was extraordinary, and I found this out afterwards, was the director would tell the performers privately before curtain to do a certain scene, a certain line, a little differently than they had previously done it. And the other actors would have to respond to this on the spot, not knowing what was coming up. Yeah. So the performance was always, in that sense, like a rehearsal. You never knew what could happen.
Yeah.
And when that's the case, you really have to listen and bravely be prepared to respond to anything. And the other effect that had was it slowed things down a little bit. And you'd think that would be bad in a stage production. But it wasn't. It just created
that's fantastic.
An incredible sort of tension
in
the moment where you think anything can happen.
Yeah. And I think our classes here, we were talking about that they're not scripted, that they're incredibly unpredictable. I mean, you can take control, but if you want it to happen in a genuine way, it has to be unpredictable.
But then there's also this element of time that you have to be willing to, not feel rushed to fill the silence.
Absolutely. You have to live with it.
I mean, listening does imply silence, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And you have to hear what is not said. You have to begin to understand who is about to speak. Because you, as a faculty member here, you really are a bridge. I mean, you have a number of roles, but one of them is to be a bridge. And you're really trying to sense who it is in the room who needs your help. Because we're not going to call on somebody. We're not going to say, Louis, what did you do? And so you have to find other modes of being attentive to. It's like in Leibniz, how things go into motion. They have this infinite solicitation toward motion, and that's what happens when someone's about to speak. It's like that first step into motion when it's finally MV squared. And you're always being attentive to that. And it's interesting that we're talking about things at the college. We're also talking about the other work I do. That someone has asked us to do work with people in special forces as part of their training.
Really?
Yeah. Because when they're in the midst of whatever mission they have, everything is completely uncertain and unpredictable, as well as rank. And so everybody has to respond to take on leadership and know when you should do that. And so that would be an interesting thing to do. We're supposed to do a workshop out in UNLV.
With book seminars?
With a Touchstones program. And supposed to do one at UNLV for people who manage crises. But it's the same thing that you're bringing up in terms of listening, right? That you've got to both appreciate the silence, and it was very, very interesting. I mean, some people are very uncomfortable with silence. I'm not particularly comfortable with it, but I know in terms of what I do, both at college and here, how many times in a seminar have you asked the opening question then to be greeted, by 6 seconds of silence? 6 seconds of silence is infinite. There's an infinitude of time. And
where do you think that comes from? Is it a cultural thing with us?
Well, I think in part it's cultural, but in part I think that there's
we feel that we have to just fill the voids all the time with something there.
Yeah, and people are very, very uneasy when nothing is happening, and they don't understand that. That sometimes
reminds me of Pascal too.
Yeah, right.
Most of human misery is traceable to the fact that
chasing rabbits.
You can't sit alone with yourself in your room.
Yeah, right.
There has to be a kind of busyness going on.
Yeah. And
but another place this comes up is in our math program, which I know you've done a lot of thinking about. But when a student goes to the board, in a way they have a script.
Right,
Because they know
exactly.
what they're going to demonstrate, and they probably prepared a little bit. But then you could ask a question. You get asked a question, and suddenly, the script sort of disappears, and you have to start improvising or saying what you're doing, or just being at the board changes your perspective on anything. It's very different from being on a paper in a book.
Yeah, it's very present for us here in mathematics. It's most for the undergraduate. I mean, I think the GI does not face this problem, but every undergraduate we have who comes in is carrying a history of habits having to do with what they think of themselves in terms of mathematics. Are they good at it? Are they not good at it? And it really comes to the surface in the beginning of the junior year. And
when they're doing calculus, Newton and the Leibniz.
Right. And so I remember once starting a junior math tutorial, knowing that within weeks the class is going to fragment, to try to avoid that fragmentation. And so you have some people who are convinced that they can't do it, and others who are convinced that they've been told that they're wonderful at it. And so I asked the class who here was told that they were very good at mathematics. And 3 or 4 raised their hands, And I said, tell us what it's like from the inside. And so they started talking about how yes, they were very, very good at mathematics, but they were very bad at other things. And especially that their ability in mathematics often set a model for what they would expect for themselves in non-mathematical realms toward people and other things, and that it was terrifically difficult, and suddenly it was all out on the table, so that the people who were supposedly not good at mathematics were now able to talk about why they weren't good at mathematics, that we weren't going to have the fear at the board. Because I think it's always the problem in our classes, and that's one of the beauties of the college, I think, is, and also the GI, so many people have said, I really changed my mind about what I can do, what I'm like, through some class that they had. Often it happens in the GI math tutorial, that they'll say, I was never able to do it, and now suddenly I feel different about myself. And I recommend that you have your wife attend the GI math tutorial. Something to talk to her about,
Well, speaking of that again, I mean, I sometimes wonder if mathematics is the one area where a group of people from whatever background can find a true common ground and experience oneness of mind as they're doing, say, a Euclid demonstration or calculus, because it's not so much a matter of your differences and your feelings and your opinions. I mean, it has a kind of sort of absoluteness and purity that is beautiful and that allows you to disappear into the work that other things don't. Do you think that's right?
I'm not sure. I think they can have a oneness of mind on other things.
Have you had that?
Yes, I mean, I don't think
happen?
and I don't think it. I wouldn't push the mathematics too much. I mean, I think that there's a sense of what you're saying, a kind of atemporal dimension to the mathematics, and I think that
pure reason.
I understand. I'm not a big pure reason person. I mean, in one sense, I'm a very big pure reason person. I mean, because I think the one author that was always on my mind here was, of course, the Critique of Pure Reason. And are we all neo-Kantians? I mean, do we all believe that we emerge at birth with a language, and the language contains categories, and that shapes our view of the world? And the question is, it's just that some of the categories are none of the categories are a priori. And I think I wrote my senior essay. I think I told you that I wrote my senior essay on how there can always be an a priori, but the a priori changes over time. In other words, so Kant and Hegel, how do you get them together? And I think I've always been on that issue about how do you get conceptual change? How does the world change? And yet how do we deal with the fact that we have systems of beliefs and faiths and whatever? And it's precisely those things that are invisible to us. I mean, Mill said it's kind of the second nature that becomes first nature to us. You know, these socially aspects of social dimensions that I think is a great deal of the importance of the college and having to sort of think through who we are and where we came from. The way you opened the feed, I mean, where'd you come from?
Where you come
right,
from?
Right. Well, I come from, thousands of years of history and tradition. You know, whether I lived for those 3,000 years and certainly coming out of a certain environment that is filled with books and expectations and habits that I've got to know how to deal with those and how to make those visible so that I'm not just, sort of responding to my own habitual attitudes, which I don't even know. Yeah.
One can see that even in mathematics.
Absolutely.
Because you have, say, 2,000 years of Ptolemy.
Yes, right. Now I came when I left high school. I left early. I needed to get out as quickly as possible, and I was supposed to be very, very good at mathematics. So I went to a place where a very important mathematician was teaching. And when I was there, I was in a class with 6 other students with him, and I realized that yes, I could understand it, but I was not creative in mathematics. This was not what I was going to do. Mm-hmm. So I left. And so I had a lot of mathematics when I came here because I went back again. When I came here, I had a great deal of mathematics. And certainly Euclid, from the perspective of mathematics, is bad mathematics. It's anyone writing Euclid now would lose their professional credentials. And so it becomes very interesting to look at Euclid.
You mean some of the definitions and
just the whole structure, the whole structure that
I
mean, it's so very different from what Hilbert created. Hilbert is mathematics, the model of mathematics, not Euclid.
So I also was very good in math coming to the college, and but one thing I learned here, which you just mentioned, is that the Euclid can be approached as a story.
Yeah.
That is, it's not this necessitated machine.
Right.
That is, it's telling a story. It has a kind of plot, has characters, themes.
Absolutely.
And that really helps a lot with students who, as you were saying, might feel themselves to be, the poetic types, not the math types.
Yeah.
They read it as a book.
Right. That's what they should be doing. It should be a text. In other words, and I think that it's interesting that the college began as I don't know if I should say as an attack on, or certainly taking a serious distance from the departmentalization of knowledge. So that there was mathematics, there was physics, there was literature, and even though we have tutorials, named that, so we have a mathematics tutorial. Nonetheless, the mathematics is not anything that I would have done majoring in mathematics somewhere, or doing mathematics. It's all mathematics that is both the source of our current mathematics and yet radically different, with a very different perspective. And what's interesting is that it's always been interesting to me that sometimes tutors, my colleagues, and whenever I'm archonning math, I try to get them not to do this because, except when they ask students to do alternate proofs. Right? I mean, there are no alternate proofs in Euclid. The question is, when do you first see an alternate proof? And what's interesting is that in the introduction to the Hegel's phenomenology of mind, he talks about the difference between philosophy and mathematics. And in mathematics, you start in a certain place and you have a path and you get to a goal. And every path is equal to every other path in a sense, as long as you get to the goal. Whereas in philosophy, the getting there is itself the important thing, is part of the there that you're getting. I believe that Euclid was more like what Hegel says about philosophy than what he says about mathematics. And for us, certainly, the way there is irrelevant for us, meaning modern mathematics. I mean, they can be, one way can be better, can be simpler, can be more beautiful, but what you want to do is get point B.
So that sounds like everything tends towards being philosophy. Whereas I would have said everything tends towards being like literature, a story.
Well, I think that's true because it's almost
including
like
Hegel.
Yeah, it's then I think that if you look at a Euclidean proof, each proof is like a poem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in other words, there's no substitutability on propositions, even though they have these little brackets in the margins. Which is probably something Theon of Alexandria did. In other words, what the reference was. But the way there and what you see when you're there are connected, and I think for Hegel, that's the case, that it should be read more the way we read a poem, that the pieces are inseparable, and wow. I think we're better doing looking at Euclid that way, and you can if it's a text, mm-hmm. but if it's mathematics, then you're carrying all this weight of what happened to you in the third grade or the fifth grade.
Well, I do think with Euclid, it's a very verbal mathematics.
Yeah.
It's meant to be articulated
right.
and shown. And I found, by the way, in reading Hegel for the first time here at the college, that it helped me immensely to read it aloud.
Oh, yeah? That's interesting.
Because, and to force myself to go through it at a reasonable pace, not stopping at every word and sentence to figure it out, but just to be swept along with it and get a sense of its power as speech, where things are being created sort of spontaneously, finding words for something.
No, I think that's right. I think and I know that in early lecture I gave here, which was on Augustine's Confessions, that I did 3 readings of Augustine's Confessions. One as it would be read by Virgil, one by Dante, and one by Hegel. In other words, how would they look at the interrelation, of the pieces in Augustine's Confessions? And it was the difference between a work that is great and a work that is my favorite. And I tried to establish a category of something that haunts you. That there was a hauntingness about certain works because of the tension between you and it.
It's that one that haunts you?
Yeah. So I was trying to say that it's almost in every text we read here, that hauntingness of a sort of great distance between you and it comes into play. We could say, well, that's that makes it both exciting, but also gives you an opportunity to look at yourself in a way that you could never look at without them.
Distance, you mean you're sensing something great, but you're at a distance.
You're at a great distance. It's important, but it's absurd.
I think. We have a colleague here, I won't say who, but who says that he, in a way, fears teaching that text because every time he does, he finds himself wanting Augustine's Confessions. Finds himself getting converted. And he's an atheist, so he doesn't want to be converted. But it has that kind of power. But I guess what you're saying, you sense the power, but not the conversion.
No, I don't think he was going to convert me. No. Though I named my son after him. My son is named Austin, which is Augustine's name in the Middle Ages. That was the one thing I and his mom agreed about. We both felt Augustine was an incomparable something, whatever.
So are you an atheist then?
Am I? I have no idea. I'm beginning to believe that there's a divinity that shapes our ends. Okay. I really have rough-hewn them, but beginning to feel that I'm not sure what I think.
Well, I was wondering though if we can relate this question of belief in God or the immortal soul, those questions to the problem of listening.
Well, I think that's true. I think because that gets back to the whole issue of community. And I think that, it's so interesting that when you spend time with alums, that what they remember, is not what Descartes did in the third meditation, that they remember a sense of community that was here. And I think that was what struck me. I mean, I came here as a perspective before I got the math assignment and was going to leave. And, I went into a freshman seminar, was on Lucretius, and I walked out and there were two people who, well, one had been in the seminar and one hadn't been, and we spent the next 3 hours down in the coffee shop talking. And they welcomed me. I mean, you were already part of that. It was, and there was that sense of community, even though I think that there are difficulties within our community. But I mean, it's the kind of thing where we criticize ourselves brutally on the inside. I was reading a piece by called Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man by James Weldon Johnson, and he's talking about how in the South they criticize themselves brutally to one another, but they'll defend themselves in the South until death to outsiders. And I think that is very much the case of the college. That
So what's the bottom line principle of that community? Say, for a community of believers, it would be certain
I don't think
core
we're a
beliefs.
cult. Yeah, I don't think we're a cult. But I think there's that sense in which there are those moments that we all. Well, in one sense, I came back as a tutor here because of work I was doing. In a sense, I mean, I often thought that the college was something that I could help take further, and that was important because it was important for me as a student. But I really came back here because I could not teach in a department because of the work I was doing. I needed to be in a place where no one owned text so that I could read or work on whatever I wanted to do. So there was that sense that there was no proprietary sense, that I could or could not write about something here. But there was also the sense, I think, that, I think it's wonderful that we are Mr. or Miss, that we're all on a uniform salary scale. Essentially, we don't negotiate, So, and I think that pervades. I mean, certainly there's tenure and non-tenure. There's that, but I think along with the students, aside from certain things, there's an aspiration to us all being in a community together. And
would you add to that then from our motto, learning to be free? That's the principle.
I would think that,
Or in your terms, no one owns the texts. It's everyone's.
yeah, I mean,
That's an egalitarian principle, but it's also you're free to work on anything.
oh, I think that's
without
true.
someone
Yes.
sort of getting in the way. In
I
some
think
way.
that's an interesting phenomenon here because I think in general, when students think of something that they want to study, or faculty, when they think of something, the first thing they do is form a study group.
Yeah.
In other words, do it with others, and that's intriguing to me. Rather than so certainly before I came here, even in the first year while I was here, everything that even though I was starting study groups all the time, that there was a kind of solitariness, and I think there's a kind of anti-Cartesianism in that. And I'm finding myself heading more and more back toward a sense in which Aristotle is saying very, very important things about the nature of community, in the sense that I increasingly believing that we need to achieve a place where you realize you're most yourself as an individual within community. And I would say that we see that sometimes in seminar, that you find that your own ideas are most yours within that environment of listening and speaking, and which seems so paradoxical since we're raised on kind of a Hobbesian, Lockean, individual, and I think that's really part of the problem that we're seeing in this country on both sides. Essentially, that sense in which there isn't a sense of community.
So your ideas are most yours, or you become most self-aware.
Yeah.
You've said this before.
Yeah.
When you're talking and listening to others, say, in seminar.
Exactly.
When it's working.
Or in an environment.
I've thought about this a lot, actually, in my own case. Say, preparing for class or writing a lecture. And I do a lot of, maybe most of my learning alone. That is, working on a book or preparing. Yeah. Going to class seems more like testing it out. It's a kind of an experiment. Let's see how these ideas that I've been having fly or don't fly, and people will respond to them. That'll give me new ideas, and I'll go back to my lonely room and work on it some more. Isn't it an exchange then, a back and forth
I think so.
between community and loneliness and lonely
Well,
work?
I think I used to operate that way. That I was terrific at teaching myself anything or exploring by myself. Increasingly, as I've taught here, I find that the most important moments do not happen in a solitary way. I mean, the Rodin thinker is unfortunately our problem. Mm-hmm. You're right, and it happens the other way, and so. But I still think the issue of how am I most myself within community mm-hmm. is the thing that needs to be explored more here. And this is a good place, a rare place to be able to do that.
Another challenge to that idea, though I do appreciate certainly the power of it when it works well in seminar and tutorial. But in addition to doing a lot of satisfying work alone, there are things that make oneself that might be incommunicable, that you just don't want to talk about or share, or don't lend themselves to words, and hence maybe music or a visual or acting or some other medium might be appropriate. But isn't that also the case?
In thinking about issues of language, and another thing with getting back to Augustine, because I think he has this sense. I mean, extraordinary intelligence is what we can see. That he's the whole composition of the Confessions is so remarkable. Though, of course, we don't assign the two most important books, 12 and 13, right?
Payoff.
We break it off where he's trying to figure out what use is philosophy in terms of faith.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of listening and speaking charitably, reading charitably, which happens on that first line of Genesis, right? In those final books, we keep away from our students. It's a big mistake. I mean, we shouldn't do that, but it's fine. There's enough there already. But I think that what you're saying sounds like there's some difficulty in the words as opposed to the speaker. And certainly starting with Bacon, and before that also, it's the instrument language that needs to be improved, corrected, whatever. Either by retrieving, the Adamic language or by creating new languages. But before that, it was really the problem with the speaker.
Yeah.
Right. It's the willfulness and I think that's what's at issue in listening.
I think that's what we're trying to do in our language tutorials, get students to be aware of language and what it can do at its best because of the models that we give them. And it'll take them, I think, often much further than they thought they can go in becoming self-aware and communicating who they are. But I guess the other thing I was having in mind, though, is if people... Well, let me put it this way. So you've thought a lot about the dynamics of seminar and of power relationships that are a part of whether seminar works well or doesn't work well. Gender relationships, race relationships, given your work not only here, but in the prisons through Touchstones. So how does one take all of that into account, and so that people who are different from each other, experience of real community?
Well, I think that we need to become more aware of our own limitations. I remember I was talking about the Harvard Club, and whenever I walked out of the Harvard Club, I would feel a sense of failure. And because these were highly able people whose listening skills were nil, and their ability to question themselves was non-existent. And I remember going into the prison on a Tuesday, because I was still doing Monday and Thursday seminars. I'd be up at the Harvard Club on Sunday. Tuesday, I'd be in prison. And once I came in, and the men, this was at the prison that no longer exists. It's the Maryland House of Corrections, which was a medium maximum security.
And you were doing seminars in there, right?
Well, I was doing, I don't like that word too much. But yeah, I was doing touchstones.
Okay.
And so I came in, and with touchstones is much more focused on process, because it's like the precondition, because you don't want to have a seminar where 20% of the people are active and 20% of the people are terrified. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what would really bothered me, and it bothered Nick also, because I figured, here we had, if anywhere you were going to, we've gone all over the world and seen things, this type of environment. And certainly when I was running Aspen, same thing. I'd see the same thing here in Africa and China. It didn't matter where it was happening. You'd have 20% who were very, very active, and in our seminars that happens too. A little bit better in the GI, actually, than with undergraduates. But in undergraduates, it's and I think I think Nick and I both felt, hey, we know how to do this. Why is it that this is still happening? Because everyone who comes here has made a really incredible decision about wanting to be here. You don't, as I said, when we were meeting, you don't get off the bus and just find yourself at St. John's. You make a life-changing decision to, and one respects all one's colleagues and all the students for having done that. And yet, so even though we want this to happen, why is it so rare? I mean, sometimes it does happen, and the question is, why is it so rare? Well, it has nothing to do with desire. I think finally it came to me that it had nothing to do with desire. It had to do with the sort of cultural inheritance of our sense of legitimacy and power and the whole package. Mm-hmm. And that I think that's what launched me into the whole issue that had always been present to me. What are the preconditions for community? I mean, certainly my past brought that up. So those became issues that I've been thinking about a lot through the years. And yet, but also the very things we read here play themselves out in the environment itself. So.
Such as?
A desire for certainty. Oh. It happens, in all of anyone's classes, and certainly you begin to see that in the meditations.
Sure.
Right. I mean, and
you also see with Descartes, whatever you do, don't make mistakes.
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
Right. Exactly. And that sin is error. Mm-hmm. Right? That mistake, and doubt is the way. It's not despair any longer. It's the way to truth. Mm-hmm. And I think that you see that it's that issue that it's so prevalent that blocks collaboration continually, because you have to trust. It's like it's a funny kind of thing. It's in all's well that ends well. It's the virtue of an if.
Oh.
You know.
As you like it.
Pardon?
It's as you like it.
I'm sorry. Right. It ends well.
Yeah, it's the condition, living with the if.
That's right.
The conditionality of life.
Yeah, and I think if you do it, I do. If we do it, and it has to happen simultaneously.
I understand that.
And I think that.
But
yeah.
You've also, I think, thought about this in historical terms, because you've been working on the three revolutions, American, French, and Russian. One of the things that's always interested me about the French, it occurs to me now to ask you this, is one of the mottos, in addition to liberté and equality, is fraternity.
Right.
Why fraternity? And
as
does
opposed
that,
to
well, it wasn't a part of our, revolutionary
Oh, no. I mean,
motto.
well, I mean, do you think?
American was all about, I guess, liberty and maybe equality. But fraternity, that's an interesting thing to put up there in lights.
Yeah, I think that's
You know?
true. Even though the year after the Declaration of Rights of Man as Citizen, was published, a Declaration of the Rights of Woman as Citizen, right? And she was guillotined the year after. So, right.
Well, they might not have worked, but they had an ideal there of some kind of
Oh no, I mean,
large-scale community.
oh, absolutely.
Brotherhood.
Yeah, but I think they're really exploring the nature of rights, and the constitution of a person. And I think, so I mean, I was looking at this. I did the three revolutions thing. This was something I did up at the Harvard Club, and also in New York and in Washington, in sort of 10 meetings. We were looking at the American Revolution was of interest to me, and I don't know that I now think the revolution was anything more than a rebellion, but that the revolution happened in 1860 or after 1865, or we're still struggling with it. I was interested in the way they wrote themselves into existence.
The founding fathers.
They wrote themselves into existence. My ex-father-in-law wrote a book. He was at the Institute. He was this political philosopher, a guy named Sebastian de Grazia. Wrote A Country with No Name. That is sort of about how the United States was kind of a default name. It wasn't going to be Columbia, or, things like that. Was interesting, and that they almost had to name themselves in a sense. And but for me, what was of interest there was issues of who had a voice. Franchise. Yeah. And it seemed to me that the French Revolution was so focused on rights, what the constitution of a person was. And it was very interesting that the eulogy I sent you today, the obituary that I wrote on Brother Robert, ends with Brother Robert at the age of 92 standing at my house over on Hanover Street, because I used to live there, leading everyone at this 92nd birthday party and singing the French national anthem. Right,
Yeah.
And so you'll see that it'll come up.
Wow.
Yeah, but I think the issue of for me, those three revolutions were important because they are absolutely current right now.
How so? Current?
Well, I mean, I think that for us, the issue of the nature of the franchise and what we think of in terms of a human being who is human, who has rights, and even more importantly, in terms of the things that were being struggled with leading up to the Russian Revolution, which is to look at the nature of community. In other words, what is your relation to the community? I don't think I would be an advocate of the turn it took either there or in China, because there's no individuality. But in a sense, those are very real options. Yeah, good.
Do you think Marx is making or will make a comeback? The reason I ask is we had a lecturer. We had a lecturer here not too long ago, Matthew Crawford, who's written a number of books, but he's a kind of new kind of Marxist, where the issue is not the workers having their labor stolen from them in effect, but people's attention, their consciousness, their attentiveness being stolen by this media-saturated, technology-crazy environment in which one is always looking at something, advertisements, films, videos, people's head in their phone, that's the new revolutionary action against that.
I think that we still see ourselves as economic beings. And it's that, and that there's some sort of a science. All Marxist type things are too entrapped in science, it seems to me, into a certain misunderstanding of the nature of science. And I think more importantly, I think that's what's at issue: science and technology, and as opposed to anything that Marx touches on. I think that, and I think all Marxist revisions essentially are looking toward some sort of a science of something, and I think we really need to begin thinking through who are we? I mean, what are we to be? If
Where are we going? That's the other
yeah,
half
absolutely,
of the
and
question.
and I think that it.
Where do you think we are going?
I think we'd like to go into the present. That's where I think we'd like to go. I mean, I think we have to stop going into some fantasy that displaces us and begin to really look at where we are and what's needed. And right now, I'm not. I think that's why I think that it's got to be through education, but it would take a generation or two. To take those steps, and so I'm not hopeful at the moment about where we're going. I think that in terms of our politics, I see very little difference.
You said a moment ago that two sides in our political system are not listening to each other.
Well, I think they're incapable of anything. I mean, I don't think. It was interesting. I ran a seminar a year after Katrina. When was Katrina? 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
There was a program that was thinking, how can we get the two sides to work together when it still seemed feasible? And so 20 people were in a group, and they couldn't be governors or senators, but they could be members of the House or they could be lieutenant governors. In other words, the future leaders of the two parties would form a group of 20 people, and they would spend 2 years together in sort of discussions, in traveling to the Middle East and traveling to China. And I had them in their second meeting, which was supposed to happen in Aspen. But people who were in the group said, no one is going to believe we're really doing any work if we go to Aspen. I can't do that. This is now 2005 or 6. And so this is a year after Katrina, which is the point of this. And so it was suggested that we do it in New Orleans.
Okay.
Right? And the place was simply still flooded. And so I had a lot of people, Gabby Giffords, Mark Kelly's wife, who was shot, and now Mark Kelly, the senator, were in the group, and so 10 or 11 Democrats, then Republicans. And I think what they had in common that they really were worried about and they could talk about was how are they going to raise enough money for their primaries?
That's all?
Yeah. In a sense. That was pretty disheartening.
Yeah.
And that went on, and I don't think it ever gotten any better in that, and so if you...
well, this comes up even in Tocqueville, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
The worry that one has when there's constant rotation in office, that's what they're thinking about.
Right. How do you stay in?
How do you...
Right. And we're seeing it.
How do you, really care for the common good when
Right.
you have to care for your immediate good?